a forgotten chessboard, a cleaner no one noticed, until one silent game cracked the silence and shook the system. She didn't raise her voice, she just moved her pieces, and the world watched. It was still dark when Margaret stepped outside. The early morning fog wrapped the city like a damp blanket, softening the sounds of distant trains that rattled along the tracks. Streetlights blinked like tired eyes. Her shoes made a dull echo against the wet pavement as she walked alone. Margaret carried a worn-out backpack over one shoulder. Inside was a small sandwich, a bottle of cheap disinfectant with a lemon scent, and an old, faded chess book. That book had once been her treasure, but now it lived at the bottom of the bag, quietly waiting. She was 36 years old and worked as a cleaner. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she walked to a tall glass building in the heart of the city, the headquarters of Grayson Global, one of the biggest companies in the country. She had been working there for almost 2 years, and yet no one ever really looked at her. The security guard at the door gave a sleepy nod. She responded with a smile. He was the only person who ever greeted her. Margaret entered the building quietly and made her way to the janitor's closet. She didn't need to check her schedule. It was always the same. Toilets, floors, bins, glass. Routine had become her partner. But even as she picked up the mop, something inside her whispered, "Not every day is just another day." Margaret moved through the quiet building, her steps careful, her body tired. She had learned how to move like a shadow, never in the way, never seen. It was strange to be so unnoticed in a place full of people in shiny shoes and sharp suits. But Margaret hadn't always been invisible. Once, she had been a name whispered at chess tournaments across the country. At just 10 years old, she was called a genius. At 15, she had already won national titles. She traveled to other countries to compete. Her fingers moved over the board like a dancer's, graceful, confident, and always thinking 5 steps ahead. Back then, newspapers had called her the Queen without a crown. Sponsors promised support. Coaches praised her. Cameras flashed. But then, life made a move she hadn't expected. At 23, Margaret found out she was pregnant. The father disappeared. The calls from sponsors stopped. The promises vanished. And she, just a young woman with no safety net, had to make a choice. Chess didn't pay for nappies, so she packed away the trophies and picked up a cleaning cloth. Now, 13 years later, she still remembered every opening, every gambit. She still dreamed of games in her sleep. But dreams don't feed children. So, Margaret cleaned. And the world forgot. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Margaret arrived before the sun. The office building was tall, clean, and full of glass. Everything looked expensive. But behind the glass walls, people didn't see her. They looked past her, as if her blue uniform made her part of the floor. She didn't mind anymore. She watched quietly. The way people walked said everything. Some rushed with purpose. Some carried coffee like it was a prize. Others barely noticed each other. But Margaret noticed everything. She had the eyes of a chess player, always watching, always reading the room. In the main lobby, there was a large crystal chessboard on a table near the CEO's office. It wasn't for playing, just decoration. The pieces sparkled under the lights. Most staff passed by without even glancing at it. But Margaret saw it every time. To them, it was pretty glass. To her, it was sacred. She'd pause for just a second, looking at the board. Sometimes she whispered a move to herself. Pawn to E4, knight to F6. Quiet little games in her head. No one ever asked if she knew how to play. They didn't know she used to win with her eyes closed. They didn't know that the cleaner used to wear a crown, just not the kind they could see. That Thursday morning, something different happened. Margaret was mopping the floor near the CEO's office. The hallway was quiet, except for soft voices coming from the other side of the glass door. A group of executives were chatting and laughing. She wasn't trying to listen, but then she heard it. "I bet even the cleaner out there doesn't know what a knight does in chess." The others laughed. quietly but clearly. Margaret froze for a second. Her hand tightened on the mop. Her heart didn't race, not anymore. She was used to being talked over, ignored, laughed at. But this felt different. They didn't know her, but they thought they did. She didn't look up. She didn't answer. She just kept cleaning. But her mind, it started playing again. Pawn to e4, knight to c6, bishop to b5. She was back at the board, in her head, calm, focused. That moment, simple as it was, lit a small fire inside her. Not anger, something deeper. They think I don't know what a knight does. I used to build kingdoms with knights. She finished the hallway in silence, but with a sharper rhythm. The pieces had started moving. The board was set, and the game had just begun. Later that same day, just before lunch, Margaret returned to clean the CEO's reception area. As she wiped the glass table, the same group of executives stood nearby, laughing again. Alistair Grayson, the CEO, stood at the center, tall, charming, and always the loudest voice in the room. He was young for his position and proud of it. Expensive watch, polished shoes, sharp words. And then he noticed her. With a smirk, he pointed at S. His friends chuckled. Margaret stopped. She looked at him, not with anger, but with calm curiosity. "Come on," he said, grinning. "Let's see what you've got. Could be fun. Maybe there's a secret champion hiding in you." Everyone laughed again. Most people would have backed away, but Margaret didn't. She walked over to the table slowly, put down her cloth, and sat in the chair opposite Alistair, like she belonged there, like she always had. "Your move," she said quietly. The room fell still. Alistair raised his eyebrows, shrugged, and moved his pawn to e4. He didn't know it yet, but he had just entered a game he wasn't ready for. Margaret didn't smile. She didn't try to impress. She simply looked at the board and replied with her move. Knight to f6. Alistair sat back, clearly amused. He moved again. Bishop to c4. She didn't blink. She moved her pawn to d6. Calm, quiet, exact. The room around them was still. No one laughed now. Something had shifted. The cleaner wasn't fumbling. She wasn't guessing. She was playing. Alistair leaned in. He looked at the board with more care. "Okay," he said. "Let's see what you've got." 5 moves. 6. His jaw tightened slightly. Margaret moved like it was memory, because it was. The board was her language. Every piece, her old friend. On the 7th move, she sacrificed her queen. Gasps. One executive whispered, "She's lost it." But Margaret didn't flinch. In chess, sometimes the boldest move is letting go of something big. She had done it before, off the board too. She had let go of her career, her name, her past. She knew sacrifice. 2 moves later, Alistair's king was trapped. She looked up gently. "Checkmate," she said, as if telling him his coffee had arrived. Silence. Complete, stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The CEO had been defeated in just 6 sharp, quiet moves, and the cleaner had just taken back her crown. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Alistair Grayson sat, frozen, staring at the board like it had betrayed him. The others shifted awkwardly. One man coughed. Another pretended to check his watch. A young intern let out a nervous laugh and quickly looked away. Margaret stood slowly. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She picked up the cloth she had left beside the chair. Then, with calm eyes and steady hands, she looked directly at Alistair. "It's good to remember," she said gently. "Not every pawn started at the end of the board." Then she turned, walked out of the room, and closed the door behind her. It wasn't just a victory. It was a message. It wasn't just a checkmate. It was a crack in the glass ceiling. Word spread fast through Grayson Global. By the end of the day, the entire office knew. The cleaner had beaten the CEO at his own game. No one had seen it coming. Some laughed behind closed doors. Others felt something stir inside them, like respect or shame. But no one could ignore it. Margaret didn't speak of it. She finished her work, like always. She didn't ask for praise, didn't mention the game. But that night, when she got home, she opened her old chess notebook. And for the first time in years, she added a new victory. The next morning, Margaret arrived at Grayson Global as usual. But the air felt different. People glanced at her. Some offered quick smiles. Others avoided her eyes completely. She was used to being invisible. Now, she was too visible. Around noon, her supervisor approached. "Margaret, the executive floor would like to see you. Right away." She nodded, confused, then quietly followed. On the third floor, she was led into a large meeting room. Inside were several senior staff members, and at the center, Alistair Grayson. He looked tired, a little stiff, but still carried that familiar CEO charm. "Margaret," he began. "We were all very impressed yesterday." She didn't speak, just listened. "We've decided to do something special," he continued. "A rematch. This time, filmed, live. A campaign, really, about celebrating hidden talents in the workplace. Cameras, lights, online streams." Margaret understood what it was. It wasn't about respect. It was about damage control. They didn't want her to win. They wanted her to perform. She looked around the room, at the glass walls, at the smiling faces, then back at the board, already set up. "You want me to play for the company?" she asked calmly. "Exactly," Alistair said. "People will love it. You'll inspire them." Margaret took a breath and made her next move, not on the board, but in life. Margaret stood quietly at the head of the table. The crystal chessboard glittered under the bright lights. A camera crew waited behind the glass. People watched from the hallway, pretending to check emails on their phones. Alistair Grayson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just imagine it," he said. "A cleaner beating the CEO again. It's powerful." She understood now. This wasn't a celebration. It was a script. They wanted her to be a story, not a person. A symbol they could point to when asked about fairness. A smiling face they could post on the company's website. Margaret looked down at the board, then up again. "No," she said softly. The room went quiet. "No?" Alistair asked, confused. "With all due respect," she said, "I don't play for show." She placed her hand gently on the board. "This table is not a stage." There was no anger in her voice, just truth. "I play because I love the game, because it gave me something when I had nothing, and I won't let it be used as a performance." Gasps. Silence. The camera crew stopped rolling. She picked up her cloth and her bag and turned toward the door. "Thank you for the offer," she said without turning back, "but I've already played my best match." Then she left, calm, clear, and undefeated. Margaret went back to her work, back to her quiet routine. But something had changed, not in her, but around her. People in the office began whispering. Some gave her looks filled with guilt, others with awe. By the afternoon, something unexpected happened. One of the interns, the same one who had laughed nervously during the first game, came to her in the hallway. "Miss Margaret," he said quietly, "I think you should see this." He handed her his phone. On the screen, a video was playing. It was the moment from the boardroom. Her voice, her refusal. This table is not a stage. Someone had recorded it, secretly. The clip had spread on social media, and it was exploding. Thousands of views, comments, shares. People were calling her a hero, a symbol, a reminder that dignity doesn't wear a title. It wears courage. Margaret stared at the screen in silence. She hadn't asked for this, but now her story was no longer just hers. Inside Grayson Global, the mood shifted. Executives who once ignored her now said polite hellos. Some tried too hard. Others didn't try at all. Alistair Grayson kept his distance. The video had done what 1,000 emails couldn't. It made the world stop and look at someone they were never meant to see. By the end of the week, Margaret's name was being mentioned in places she had never imagined. News blogs shared her story. A local radio host called her a modern-day queen of strategy. Chess clubs started discussions. Parents showed their children the video and said, "Look, this is what quiet strength looks like." But Margaret, she still wore the same uniform, still cleaned the same glass. She didn't ask for interviews, didn't post online. She just kept showing up. The only thing that changed was the way people looked at her, and that was enough. Some of the staff began leaving notes on her cleaning cart. "You inspire me. I used to play chess too. Thank you." The intern who had given her the video approached again, this time with a notebook in hand. "Could you teach me something?" he asked shyly. Margaret smiled, a warm, tired smile. "I can show you a few openings," she said, "but chess is more about patience than power." They sat on a bench during lunch. She sketched a simple board in his notebook and began explaining each piece, like old times. No spotlight, no stage, just two people and a quiet game. And in that small moment, she found something even better than victory. She found purpose. That Sunday morning, Margaret was cleaning out her hallway closet. She hadn't touched the bottom drawer in years. It was full of old shoes, dust, and forgotten things. But there, under a folded jumper and a cracked photo frame, she found her old chessboard. It was wooden, a little scratched on the corners. The pieces were mismatched. A few pawns were chipped, but it still smelled like memory. She sat on the floor, brushing the dust away slowly, gently, as if waking up something precious. In the living room, her 13-year-old son Leo looked up from the couch. "What's that, Mum?" She smiled. "A part of me you haven't met yet." They sat on the floor, side by side. Margaret laid out the board, placing the pieces carefully. The king, the queen, the rooks. Leo leaned in, eyes wide. "You really used to play." "I still do," she said. She showed him how the knight moves in an L shape, how the bishop stays on its color, how the queen is the most powerful piece, but still must be protected. Leo watched closely, listening to every word. And Margaret felt something in her heart settle. She wasn't just passing on a game, she was passing on a legacy. That afternoon, Margaret and Leo walked down to the small park near their flat. It wasn't much. A patch of grass, a few benches, and a large old tree in the corner. But it was peaceful. They brought the chessboard with them, tucked under Leo's arm like treasure. Margaret set it up on a low stone table beneath the tree's shade. A gentle breeze passed through the leaves, as if watching too. Soon, two younger children from the neighborhood wandered over. "What's that game?" One of them asked, curious. Margaret looked up with a soft smile. "It's called chess," she said. "Would you like to learn?" They nodded, and just like that, a little circle formed around the board. She began with the basics: how each piece moves, what checkmate means, how to think ahead. She didn't rush. She explained slowly, with warmth and patience. More children came. Some sat on the ground, others stood behind. Even a few parents watched from nearby, whispering to each other, "Isn't she the one from the video?" But Margaret wasn't focused on any of that. She was teaching, and for the first time in years, she felt not like someone who had been forgotten, but someone who was giving something back. No spotlight, just leaves, laughter, and the sound of young minds learning to think like queens. The sun began to set behind the trees. The sky turned soft and orange, casting long shadows across the park. Margaret packed away the chessboard slowly, brushing each piece with care before placing it back in the old cloth bag. Leo helped gather the pieces. The younger children waved goodbye, promising to come again next weekend. "Mum," Leo asked as they walked home, "why did you stop playing?" Margaret paused for a moment before answering. "Because life moved faster than I could." She looked ahead, then down at her son. "But it's okay, I had you, and that was worth every match I missed." Leo didn't say anything. He just reached out and held her hand. Back at their small flat, Margaret placed the chessboard on the table by the window, not hidden anymore, out in the open. That night, while Leo slept, she opened her old notebook again. Flipping through the worn pages, she smiled at the old diagrams, the scribbled notes, the tiny victories frozen in ink. She added one more line at the end of the last page. "Taught 5 children under a tree. They smiled." It wasn't a trophy, it wasn't a tournament, but it felt like the biggest win of her life. Because not every crown is gold. Some are made of patience, love, and courage. A new week began at Grayson Global. Margaret returned just like always. Same uniform, same cart, same routine. But this time, there was something different in the air. People greeted her with quiet respect. Some still looked unsure, awkward, but they no longer looked through her. She didn't need fame. She didn't want a promotion. She only wanted to walk through life with dignity. And now, finally, people saw it. In the lift, a junior executive nodded at her. "Good morning, Margaret." It was a small thing, but to her, it felt like checkmate. Upstairs, the crystal chessboard still sat near the CEO's office, untouched since the day she played. Alistair Grayson never mentioned the match again. But whenever he passed her in the hallway, he lowered his voice. His eyes no longer held sarcasm, only silence. Margaret finished her shift, clocked out, and walked into the afternoon sun. That evening, at the park, the children waited for her, their little wooden boards set up on the benches. She sat down, smiling as Leo began showing a younger girl how to castle her king. Margaret watched them from across the table. She wasn't just a cleaner. She was a teacher, a strategist, a mother, a quiet warrior. And in the game of life, she had made her most powerful move. She never gave up. Because even pawns, when they reach the other side, can become queens.